and a very warm welcome. I'm Megha Sharma. Now, tensions continue to escalate amidst the war between Ukraine and Russia. And despite best efforts, the US President Donald Trump has not been able to negotiate the peace deal between the two warring nations. In a situation such as this, what alternatives does the world have to end the war? To discuss this and more, joining me on the show is the former Australian Prime Minister, Mr. Tony Abbott. Thank you, Prime Minister Abbott, for speaking to us. And my first question, of course, is whether it is high time this war ended, and how do you propose it is brought to an end?
Well, Megha, yes, it would be good for everyone if this war could end, because not only has the war caused massive casualties in Ukraine, civilian casualties as well as military ones, not only has the war caused massive losses to the Russian armed forces, but it's caused significant economic disruption all around the world, particularly in countries which are dependent upon Ukrainian grains for their food supply. So the sooner we can end this war, the better, but it's got to end on a fair basis. And if Ukraine is forced to surrender some of its territory to the aggressor, in this case Russia, if Ukraine is forced to surrender territory to the aggressor, it's got to have meaningful security guarantees going forward. And the only thing that will really guarantee the future peace, given President Putin's confirmed aggressive intentions towards Ukraine, would be a serious foreign troop presence on the ground. Now, the Russian president seems to have said that he wouldn't accept European troops on the ground in the absence of, say, British and French forces. We know the British and the French have very serious and professional armed forces. We would need another country with serious, professional, credible armed forces to provide the kind of security guarantee that Ukraine really needs if it's to be confident that this is the last time it's going to be invaded by an aggressive imperialist Russia.
Okay. I would like to understand from you, with the kind of backlash President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has seen in the recent past, especially the admonishment by US President Donald Trump when they both met. Do you think Zelenskyy is the right man to lead Ukraine towards a peace deal?
Well, he has been leading Ukraine magnificently for the past few years. I know that he was a bit unpopular before the war started, but certainly Ukrainians rallied around him enormously once the war had started. And I guess all of us remember when the war started and Russian tanks and Russian death squads were heading towards Kiev, he was offered a helicopter ride to freedom by President Biden, and Zelenskyy magnificently responded, "No, I need ammunition. I need ammunition, not an escape." Now, I think that put him in a league of his own when it comes to wartime leadership. It certainly made him stand out as the complete opposite to the leaders of Afghanistan, who were happy to flee the country in a helicopter with a bag of cash once the Taliban were advancing on their capital. So I think that President Zelenskyy has demonstrated enormous personal courage. I think he's demonstrated enormous political integrity. And I think the success of his country in holding off this much larger Russian attack for over 3 years now testifies to the quality of his leadership. So just because you've had a difficult conversation with President Trump in the Oval Office doesn't mean that you're not eminently suitable to lead your country through this war to a sustainable and as just a peace as can be managed.
Do you think Ukraine must hold fresh elections now after the expiration of Zelenskyy's term, as has been put as one of the conditions for the Russians to come to the table to negotiate peace?
Well, a country which is at war, a country which has something like 20% of its territory occupied by an aggressor, finds it very difficult to have free and fair elections. Now, there's precedent for this. Britain, during the Second World War, delayed elections that would otherwise have been due for, I think, 3 years. So it's not unusual for a country at war to delay elections, particularly when there's no real pressure from the Ukrainian people for fresh elections, and the Ukrainian leader, President Zelenskyy, remains very popular inside Ukraine. Any suggestion that President Zelenskyy is not popular is simply false.
Why do you think the European Union nations are resisting from lifting sanctions from Russia?
Well, they think that as long as Russia is conducting an aggressive war against Ukraine, the sanctions should stay. They think, rightly in my view, that as long as Russia is conducting an aggressive war against Ukraine, European arms supplies to Ukraine should continue. Now, none of us want this war to continue for longer than is absolutely necessary to keep the Ukrainian state independent and Ukrainians alive. But if there is going to be a ceasefire, it's got to be a ceasefire on reasonable terms, and it can't just be a pause for Putin to rearm and attack again. It's got to be a meaningful and lasting ceasefire, and that's why it's so important that it has got to give up substantial territory in its east. If it's got to surrender the Crimea, well, there's got to be, in return, meaningful security guarantees, and the only meaningful security guarantee, given the history, will be a strong presence of credible foreign troops on the ground to act as a deterrent to any future aggression by President Putin of Russia.
And as you opine that, you need to have foreign troops deployed along the border to police the ceasefire when and if it is negotiated. And you've proposed that India could perform such a role. Do you think Russia, European Union, United States would be accepting of your proposal?
Well, I can't see why any of them would not accept it. For one thing, India has historically good relations with Russia. For another thing, the Indian Army is a highly competent, widely respected, very professional armed force that would be more than capable of effectively resisting any future Russian attack, should such an attack be made. In fact, I think the presence of a substantial force of Indian troops along any ceasefire line would all but guarantee that Russia would never again attack Ukraine. Let's face it, India doesn't just have very formidable conventional armed forces, but India is also a nuclear power. So the idea that India would be intimidated by President Putin's nuclear bullying, I just don't think holds water. So if you can't have serious armed forces from, say, Britain and France there, I think that an acceptable alternative option would be having significant armed forces from India there. Not only would this be a wonderful contribution by India towards a more peaceful world, but it would also be a sign to the whole world that India is prepared to start shouldering some of the responsibilities to the wider world which come with the kind of economic strength and global status that India is now assuming.
Okay, so, there are world leaders, different heads of states who have also gone about and spoken about India's role of a possible mediator because of its cordial relations with Russia, or for that matter, with the United States of America or a number of European Union nations. They see India as a role that is acceptable to the world to negotiate a possible peace deal. So why has it not happened up until now?
Well, that's a very good question, and I can't really answer that. But the truth is that India is a very credible country with a strong economy, now the world's fifth largest, with strong armed forces, with its own nuclear deterrent. I think India is certainly much better placed than a country such as Turkey, for instance, to act as a potential mediator. And as I said, given that there does have to be a significant presence of serious foreign troops on the ground to act as a guarantee of any ceasefire, I can't think of a better country than India if the British and the French, for whatever reason, are not acceptable.
China has also very recently, in fact, several times in the past as well, proposed to play the role of a peacemaker. How accepting would that be to the world?
Well, I doubt that would be acceptable to the Ukrainians, given that the Chinese have been backing Russia from the very beginning. They've been breaking sanctions. They've been supplying Russia with various forms of material assistance. And I am confident that the North Korean troops that have been on the battlefield with the Russians would not have gone but for the active support of the Chinese Communist government. So I think the idea of someone who is plainly on one side in this somehow being an honest broker, I'm sorry, that just doesn't work.
Okay. Also, a question that comes to mind is amidst Trump's tariff wars, how is it going to impact the Ukraine war and the relationship between European Union and Russia?
Look, I think that's really a separate issue. I'm pretty much a free trader myself. I can understand why you might have high tariff walls against your geostrategic competitor, but I certainly think that free trade is better in terms of maximising well-being, and I certainly think that countries are well advised to have free trade with their friends. So look, I'm a free trader, but I certainly don't think that Donald Trump's recent imposition of across-the-board tariffs on many countries, including his allies such as Australia and Britain, I don't think that this trade issue should impact on security partnerships and military alliances. I think they're two separate issues.
Okay, let's speak about politics in Australia and the elections that are going to be taking place very soon. How has the current Australian government under Prime Minister Anthony Albanese fared in its last term?
Well, you'd expect me to be critical because I'm obviously on the other side of the political fence to the current Prime Minister. I'm reluctant to be two-party political, given that I'm talking to a subcontinental audience here as opposed to an Australian audience. And while there are about 1 million Australians of Indian background, there aren't too many people in India who can actually vote in Australia. I think the big problem in Australia right now is that our cost of living has been going up, our standard of living has been going down. It's thought that standards of living here in Australia over the last 3 years have declined by about 8%, an unprecedented and unique decline, not repeated anywhere else in the world. And I fear that some government policies have been making that worse. So what I want to see are better policies to bring energy prices down, better policies to bring low-skill immigration under better control, better policies to ensure that our great industries, our exports like coal and gas, are treated properly and encouraged. And I think that on balance, that would be better done if you had a different government. But as I said, I don't want to be too critical of the current Australian government because in the end, as an Australian citizen, regardless of the political complexion of the government of the day, I do want that government to succeed.
Okay, I will have to ask you this. You are a politician. What are the chances of the Liberal Party of Australia winning this election? And who is going to be the most popular face leading the Liberals?
Well, a man called Peter Dutton is our leader. He was the Defence Minister under the former Morrison government. He's been in Parliament for a very long time. He was a senior cabinet minister in my government a decade back. He's a very decent man, a very impressive man. And should he get elected, I think he'll make a wonderful Prime Minister. I think he'll make a wonderful Prime Minister in the tradition of John Howard, by far our best recent Prime Minister. As to his chances, well, is his chance 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%? I don't know. All I do know is that he is a very credible contender for the top job, and I think he is highly competitive, to put it at its most reserved, when it comes to contesting and winning this election.
All right, on that note, I come to the end of this interview. Prime Minister Abbott, it's always a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Meager, it's an honour to be with you. Thank you.